Meeting number 42 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person, in the room, and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we continue, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters. You'll also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. I'd like to take a moment to comment on the comment for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name or ask a question directly by a member before speaking. For those participants on video conference, click the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a selection for the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. I'd like to remind all witnesses that committee members may ask questions in either French or English. If you need interpretation, please take a moment now to prepare your earpiece and select the listening channel you need in advance in order to take full advantage of the time allocated. A reminder that all comments should be made through the chair. And for members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will try to manage the speaking order to the best of our ability. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 18, 2025, the committee is resuming its study on food security in the face of global instability. I'd like to welcome our witnesses who are joining us here today. We have from Montreal Economic Institute, Renaud Broussard and Gabriel Gigler. From the Grain Farmers of Ontario, Jeff Harrison. And we have from Agri-Food Analytics Lab, Sylvain Charbois and Olivia Romanu. Yes, thank you for joining us here in person. Welcome. And why don't we start with Agri-Food Analytics Lab? You have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear today. I am joined today by Olivia Romanu, a research associate at the lab who is attending in person in Ottawa. I am appearing remotely today from Cork, Ireland, where I am speaking at an international agribusiness conference examining the state of the global food economy. The discussions taking place here reinforce how interconnected food systems have become and how geopolitical tensions, climate-related disruptions, supply chain shocks, and economic uncertainty continue to challenge food security around the world. Food security is often misunderstood. Canada does not have a food security problem. We have a competitiveness and productivity problem. We are one of the world's largest agricultural producers and exporters, yet millions of Canadians struggle to afford food. The challenge before us is not simply producing more food, but producing, processing, distributing, and marketing food more efficiently and competitively. Last week's announcement of Canada's National Food Security Strategy is an important acknowledgement that food matters. The strategy includes several promising investments in food processing, controlled environment agriculture, food hubs, and support for independent grocers. These initiatives may strengthen parts of our domestic food system and improve resilience. However, a strategy is more than a collection of investments. A strategy requires a clear vision, measurable objectives, and a framework for accountability. Food security cannot be purchased through government spending alone. It is earned through investment, innovation, productivity, and competitiveness. Today, we would like to offer 3 recommendations that would strengthen Canada's food security without requiring significant new spending by Ottawa. First, make food affordability a formal lens for federal policy making. Before introducing new regulations, taxes, or programs affecting the food sector, government departments should be required to assess their impact on food affordability and food system competitiveness. Canadians deserve to know how public policy affects the cost of food before decisions are made. Second, launch a national review of internal trade barriers affecting food. Canadians often speak about food sovereignty and local food systems, yet we continue to tolerate rules that make it unnecessarily difficult to move food, labor, and products across provincial boundaries. Improving the flow of food within Canada would strengthen resilience, increase competition, and lower costs without spending a dollar of additional public money. And third, establish measurable national food security benchmarks and publish annual scorecards. We cannot manage what we do not measure. Canada should track indicators such as food affordability, domestic processing capacity, investment levels, productivity growth, food insecurity rates, and supply chain resilience. The federal government has announced a 10-year strategy. Canadians deserve to know whether the country is actually becoming more food secure over time. Food security is an unattainable world, will not be achieved through protectionism or self-sufficiency. No country can produce everything efficiently. Canada's strength has always been its ability to trade, innovate, and compete. Our objective should be to build a food system that is resilient, productive, globally connected, and affordable for Canadians. We look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to the Grain Farmers of Ontario. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jeff Harrison. I farm in Quinte West, Ontario, and I serve as chair of the Grain Farmers of Ontario, representing Ontario's 28,000 corn, oat, soybean, barley, and wheat farmers. Today, I want to talk about a simple reality. Canada cannot have food security if farmers cannot afford to farm. Grain farmers are doing everything we can to keep producing crops for food, feed, and other products. But many of the challenges we face today cannot be solved at the farm gate. They will require government action. Risk is not new to farmers. Weather and markets pose a significant enough challenge, but the rising costs for equipment, fuel, fertilizer, and other farm inputs are on an upward trajectory that is not sustainable. Today, the farm input price index sits at record levels. Meanwhile, the prices farmers receive for their crops have not kept pace with the cost of producing them. Fertilizer is a perfect example. Without fertilizer, production is threatened. It is not optional for the vast majority of farmers, and it is the food that crops need to grow. Retail fertilizer prices remain high, and farmers remain deeply concerned about both affordability and reliable access to supply as we prepare for 2027. Supply at all cost is not a solution for our farmers that are expected to be globally competitive. Farmers in Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada depend on imported fertilizer sourced from regions around the world. When supply chains are disrupted, these farmers feel the impact almost immediately. 4 years ago, Canada imposed tariffs and sanctions on fertilizer imported from Russia and Belarus, two countries that had historically supplied significant portions of the fertilizer used by farmers in Eastern Canada. The cost of that decision was passed directly to farmers, and it does not take much of an understanding of economics to know that these tariffs are negatively impacting our farmers. The Canadian government has created exemptions for other products, and my question is simply, why can't exemptions be made for products like fertilizer, the product that helps feed Canadians and supports our food system? Removing tariffs on fertilizer imports from Russia and Belarus would be a practical, immediate step that could help reduce costs and improve supply security for Canadian farmers. But fertilizer is only one challenge. Business risk management programs are supposed to protect farmers from the things that we cannot control: droughts, floods, trade disruptions, geopolitical instability, and market shocks. That is exactly what these were designed to do. Canada has invested in business risk management programs, but for grain farmers, agri-stability simply does not work well enough when we need it most. When crop prices fall below the cost of production, farmers need meaningful protection. Unfortunately, agri-stability fails to provide this support when required to bridge that gap. Grain farmers in Eastern Canada have spent years telling government this. We have participated in reviews, provided recommendations, built coalitions, and commissioned research because we knew there would be a tipping point eventually, and that tipping point has arrived. At the same time, our competitors in the United States benefit from responsive risk management programs and billions of dollars in supplemental support payments. They have also taken steps to secure fertilizer supplies and protect farm profitability during periods of market disruption. As a result, American farmers are often better positioned to withstand the same challenges Canadian farmers face. For Ontario grain farmers, the most effective long-term solution is clear. The federal government should partner with Ontario in supporting the Ontario Risk Management Program. This program is straightforward. It calculates the cost of production of crops that compares the cost to market returns and provides support when prices fall below the cost of production. And the Ontario government has made significant investments in this program. It helps farmers manage risk when margins are squeezed by high input prices and high input costs and low commodity prices. Most importantly, it gives farmers confidence that they can continue producing food, doing what they do best for Canadians. If farmers cannot manage risk, they cannot continue farming. And when farmers disappear, the consequences extend far beyond agriculture. When that happens, Canada loses food producing capacity. Business risk management programs are not simply farm programs. They are food security programs. A country that cannot support its farmers cannot guarantee its food security. The issue of food affordability, food sovereignty, food independence, whatever the term you want to use, is a very complex situation. But farmers are not the cause of this situation we find ourselves in as a nation. But they are an integral part of the solution.
Mr. Harrison, I'm going to have to stop you there.
This will need to be a Canadian commitment.
Thank you so much. Next, I'll go to the Montreal Economic Institute for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, bonjour à tous.
Thank you very much. Good day. Thank you for extending your invitation to my colleague Gabrielle Giguère and me to appear here today. For those who may not be familiar with us, the Montreal Economic Institute is an independent think tank with offices in Montreal, Ottawa, and Calgary that contributes to the public debate in Canada with research and media appearances since 1998. Food is a key factor in the cost of living, representing the fourth largest expense for Canadian households after taxes, housing, and transportation. Given the significance of this budget item, the rapid rise in food prices we've seen in recent years has taken a toll on family budgets. Families are feeling the growing pressure. While the wish to take action to relieve this pressure is commendable, Canadian households are looking not for intentions but for results. Unfortunately, several of the measures recently announced by the federal government missed the mark. One example that concerns us is the push for the government to become more involved in food distribution. To be clear, the federal government is no more a competent food wholesaler than it would be a competent grocer. The Food Hub initiative, funded at great expense to Canadian taxpayers, faces the same challenges of logistical complexity, information management, and incentives as those faced by the government-run stores we hear about in Toronto and south of the border. The average Canadian grocery store sells between 15,000 and 18,000 distinct products. This figure encompasses everything from what small local chains sell, such as Franchement Bon in the Montreal's Ahuntsic neighborhoods, to massive retailers like Walmart and Costco. Needless to say, managing such a supply chain for perishable goods, such as with each having its own safety requirements, is a colossal challenge. Yet our major grocery chains manage to handle distribution and retail sales with a profit margin of between 3 and 5%. Even assuming the government could do this with the same level of efficiency as the private sector, the maximum potential savings resulting from this would be between $11 and $18 per person per month, the cost of 3 bags of chips. So it's not by involving the government, whether at the retail level, as some activists claim, or at the distribution sectors the government seems to intend to do, that we will make food more available.
English for the benefit of the room, the average Canadian grocery store sells between 15,000 and 18,000 distinct products. This represents both small local banners such as Franchement Bon in the Montreal borough of Ahuntsic and large surface stores such as Walmart and Costco. Needless to say, managing such a logistics chain for perishable products, each with their own hygiene requirements, represents a colossal task. Our large grocery chains manage to run both distribution and retail nationwide with a profit margin estimated between 3 and 5%. Even if we assume the government could do it with the same level of efficiency as a private sector, The maximum theoretical saving one could get are about $11 to $18 per person per month, or about a cost of 3 bags of chips. It should therefore be noted that this is not by...
We have to stop for 1 second. Mr. Gord?
Pas s'il manquait un bouton d'ouvert de l'autre côté, là, mais...
The channel for French is in English.
Okay.
Interpretation is in French.
It's on this one. C'est anglais.
It's working? Okay, thank you very much. Please continue.
Thank you. It should therefore be noted that it's not by getting the state to win into food retail, as some activists pretend, or to food distribution, as the government seems keen to do, that will bring prices to levels that are affordable to Canadian families. Ça ne veut pas dire pour autant que le gouvernement n'a pas de rôle à jouer. Comme bien souvent, ce rôle n'est pas de créer de nouveaux programmes ou de nouvelles structures, mais bien de cesser de contribuer au coût de vie.
The idea this is not to say that the government has no role to play. As is...
It's going again? Okay. Please continue.
Merci.
It is not, that doesn't mean the government has no role to play. As often is the case, it shouldn't be creating new programs or new structures, but rather stop contributing to the high cost of life with its public policies. Look at tariffs, look at production quotas, and other measures that will help improve the situation for Canadian consumers. Reviewing what the government already controls will be more useful. Thank you for your time and attention.
And I appreciate your patience. We'll go to the Conservatives now for 6 minutes. Mr. Barlow.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to our witnesses. Mr. Harrison, I'm going to start with you. And we've heard from a lot of farmers across Eastern and Central Canada specifically about the fertilizer issue, that not only are the fertilizer suppliers not committing to prices for next year, but also not committing to even having supply available for farmers. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is.
So, as you mentioned, that Canada is the only G7 country that has a 35% tariff on fertilizer imports from Russia and Belarus specifically, which is putting you at a competitive disadvantage. What has been the response from the Liberal government in your requests from GFO and other farm groups in your request to remove the fertilizer tariff to make fertilizer more affordable for farmers? What has been the government response to your request?
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Barlow. We have been heard, and the situation has been acknowledged, but still no action and no meaningful action. And farmers are continuing to pay a high price as a result. I appreciate the government's understanding of the situation, but without action, it's meaningless. And we understand that it is a very sensitive issue. Farmers are compassionate people. We condemn the atrocities we saw in the Ukraine, and we never want to see that again. But the reality is those tariffs are penalizing Canadian farmers.
Thanks, Mr. Harrison. Would the reality of those tariffs be that the only one being punished is Canadian farmers? This is in no way punishing the Russian regime or Belarus in any way. That fertilizer is still being purchased. The United States is still purchasing fertilizer. The only victims of this tariff set by the Liberal government is Canadian farmers. Would that be accurate?
Yes, that is fair to say, and we have studies that we have had that document those statements. Farmers in Canada want to produce high quality, abundant, affordable food. And in Canada, and farmers, that's what they do. And they do it well in Canada, but they need to be able to work on a level playing field and be able to be globally competitive to be sustainable.
Thank you. And certainly I want to move to a different topic with you, Mr. Harrison. This study is about, certainly food security and food affordability. But the Liberal government is also proposing the Alto high-speed rail, which will impact perhaps thousands of farms across Ontario and Quebec. I have seen a number of posts and announcements from Grain Farmers of Ontario, but other farm groups in Ontario and Quebec who are strongly opposed to this project. What impact do you believe that the Alto high-speed rail will have on grain farmers in Ontario and your ability to be productive and competitive?
We're very concerned. We have supported our general farm organizations in their position, and we're very concerned about agriculture and the impact on farmland and the impact on farmers, as well as our rural communities. We're concerned about emergency services, school buses. We can't afford to fix bridges and infrastructure in our province now. How can we afford to fix more? And of course, the inefficiencies created by triangular fields and just the uncertainty of family farms in planning for the future is a grave concern, and we need these projects to operate on merit and not jeopardize farmers as a result.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I want to switch to Mr. Charlebois. And you mentioned that we don't have a food security problem as much as we have a productivity and competitiveness problem, a challenge in Canada. And in your op-ed last week, you talked about the Liberals' food strategy being not really a food security strategy because it doesn't address the real core issues that we're facing. Do you feel this was a missed opportunity, not addressing, eliminating the industrial carbon tax, for example, deficit spending, and really taking steps to harmonize regulations? Is this a missed opportunity?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Absolutely. That points to our first recommendation for today, which is to make food affordability a formal lens for federal policymaking. If that were the case, Mr. Barlow, I don't think the carbon pricing policy would affect food at all right now, because based on our research, the carbon pricing policy is impacting our sector's competitiveness right now, which is unfortunate. No studies were done before 2018 to assess that.
This is a really quick yes or no question for you, Mr. Charlebois, so I need to move on. But you are one of the preeminent experts in Canada on food pricing. You are one of the authors of the Food Price Index on an annual basis. Were you consulted on the Liberals' food security strategy at all before it was released last week?
I was not, no.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I want to now take the opportunity to table the motion that I had put on notice last week. And this was the motion regarding the study on Alto. And I'm happy to read that into the record, but I believe, certainly from the comments from Mr. Harrison that we had here today, that this is imperative that we invite farmers and people who are going to be impacted by this proposal by the Liberal government when we have a high-speed rail project that could negatively impact thousands of farms and put food productivity and food security in Canada at risk. Now, I know my colleagues across the way are going to argue that the route for Alto is not yet finalized, and they would prefer to wait until the route is cemented down, let's say. But I think that is a disservice. I believe that it is imperative that we listen to farmers before the route is finalized, which I think could be months away from now. If we don't listen to the farmers now and they have some input into the impact that this is going to have on their livelihoods, certainly we're already hearing the mental health impact this is having on farmers. If we wait until after the road is already finalized by the government, I think this is a horrible disservice. I think it's much more beneficial if we listen to the farmers now, get their input, and certainly from our perspective, I don't see any benefit of Alto at all, let alone the cost of this project, but the impact this is going to have on farmers. So I believe the time to do this study is as quickly as possible. And I'm happy to read it, but I think everybody has it.
I think everyone has it.
So I would like to move that motion now, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so the motion has been moved. Debate, Mr. Lemaire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Indeed, the Alto project is problematic, and this is why so many of its elements haven't yet been analyzed and are not being taken into account. We proceeded in a cavalier fashion, providing powers to a company that is using it against farmers. In Quebec, this may affect over 500 agricultural trains, lands, and of course a train can turn, and even when it turns, it takes 11 kilometers to get it around, even slightly. So having any flexibility to go around farms, that's impossible. We can't make tunnels and bridges every time they would be needed. Probably in this project, especially given the way Alto is running it, create a real social crisis. As a committee, we have the responsibility to give a voice to those who at present don't have one. The consultations were carried out far from the agricultural areas that will be impacted and were carried out quickly during the holidays, for example, before people even heard about the project. At the Bloc Québécois, we had set 4 minimal conditions for supporting this project. A high-speed train, of course, it's a wonderful dream. We're all enchanted. In an ideal world, I would have one where we are, out in Abitibi-Témiscamingue. But I think we're just kind of losing sight of reality. What we need is real social acceptability, and that is far from having been guaranteed. No work is being done to ensure it. An independent financial evaluation, that's another requirement. We have no figures. All such projects around the world have overshot their intended cost by at least 50%. So we might be up to, $200 billion for this project that we have in mind. I think it is the responsibility of our committee to hear these facts, the financial evaluation, and to withdraw the possibility of expropriating land in C-15, because this gives the company power that leads to people abandoning their agricultural lands. And of course, very well, they're provided with funds, they're paid, and eventually they're going to be, drones passing over to decide whether you'll keep or not your land. This is not real public consultation. And without that, I think we can take for granted that the project will not be viable. And as a committee, the Committee of Agriculture and Agri-Food, we have a responsibility. This will become a social crisis. Agricultural specialists and farmers are very worried, and they turned up here on the Hill last week, both from Quebec and from Ontario. We have a responsibility to hear them. People are distressed. This has a psychological effect on them. This will have a serious effect on the mental health of these farmers when you've been working land for generations and suddenly you're told a train is going to run through it. You can't think that this will go well for you. And, I can tell you, if there's a farm building in the way, it's just going to go. So a number of landowners have said that they're worried, and it is our responsibility to hear them as quickly as possible. Thank you, Chair.
MP Chatel.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à mes...
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to my colleagues. Here, from our point of view, we too are concerned by what farmers are telling us. Of course, for a number of families, as my colleague, Mr. Lemire, has aptly pointed out, agricultural land is more than an economic asset. It is the fruit of generations of work. It is what you've inherited. So we fully understand the depth of the concern, and we do agree that this committee must indeed hear the voices of farmers who will be affected or could be affected. However, ALTO at this point is carrying out consultations. They have not yet announced the route, the intended route, the ideal route, nor have they announced the mitigation measures for the lands that would be affected, nor the compensation measures. If we were to undertake a study at this point, we think that it would be asking farmers to come in and provide testimony on hypothetical scenarios rather than on real potential effects. And this would only add to the uncertainty that we are now seeing. It would be more constructive, surely, for our committee to wait until ALTO has announced its ideal route and also the measures that they will set in to protect the agricultural sector. And then the committee will be in a better position to measure real worries based on real plans rather than hypotheses. And the committee will be in a better position to make recommendations based on facts we will have heard of. So I don't think, for those reasons, that this is the right time to start the study. I do think we should bring this back up as a topic for discussion in the fall. We'll have a lot more information available at that point. So I propose that we adjourn the debate.
To adjourn debate, which is not debatable, so we'll go right into a vote.
Recorded vote, Chair.
Recorded vote? Okay. All those in favor?
No.
Oh.
Recorded vote.
Recorded vote. Okay, go ahead.
Recorded vote.
Yep, recorded vote.
Madame Châtel,
Oui.
Mr. Connors,
Oui.
Madame Dandurand,
Oui.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes. Oh, come on.
Ms. McDonald,
We need to do this.
Yay.
We need to study, but we could do it in a better way.
Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Barlow,
Absolutely not.
Mr. Bragdon,
No.
Mr. Epp,
No.
Monsieur Gou,
Non.
Monsieur Lemire,
Contre.
Mr. Chair, yeas pour 6, 6, nays contre 5, 5.
Okay, so the motion passes, and that's it. I guess we just
Motion to
continue.
adjourn the debate.
Yeah, so
Carries.
yeah, it carries. So at that point, we just go back to where we were.
Yes, Mr. Barlow has
About 30
expired.
seconds left.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
And point of order, Mr. Chair.
M'assurer, évidemment, comme le débat
I just want to make sure that we have adjourned the debate, meaning that this is something we should address quickly in September. We have lost an opportunity to ensure that people who will be victims of this train would be heard before conditions are imposed on them, because C-15 imposes conditions on them. It would have been wiser to discuss this before, but I just want to make sure that we will return to this topic in the fall.
Adjourned debate on the issue. We're going to go back to where we were. Is it?
Je pose une question, Monsieur le Président.
I put a question, Mr. Chair. Yes, my point of order is that the motion has not been downed. It must be discussed again. It must come back at the next meeting that we have. It's important to ensure that the motion still exists, basically.
However, my interpretation is that the committee can discuss any item at any moment that it chooses, you know, if it's the will of the committee. Mr. Gord, is this a point of order? Or are you just making a comment?
Oui, merci.
Mr. Gord, go ahead.
Point d'ordre et observation.
Point of order and observation. I would like to underscore that my right to speak was withdrawn by a procedure.
Mon droit de parole a été sous.
I had nearly finished, so my right to speak has not been respected. I was on the list to speak, and this to me is a parliamentary
Like, if you have a point of order, be very clear on the point. But this is not an opportunity now to reflect on the vote that we've just taken. I have next 6 minutes going to the
Point
Liberals.
d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. I have a point of order regarding what you have just stated. It is always appropriate for any member of parliament to speak up when they feel that their parliamentary rights have not been respected. I do not accept what you have said from your chair, and I hope that you will check what you have just said and that you will get back to us on it.
A vote. The vote concluded, and the order of business was we have witnesses here. The next speaker were the Liberals, who have 6 minutes. That was the order of business, and you can raise always a point of order, but just to say, you know, you want to speak on any issue at any moment is not in order. So I'm going to go to the Liberals for 6 minutes. I believe I have MP Mingarelli for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à tous les témoins d'études.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses.
Questions to yourself, Monsieur Charlebois, to start. From your data, how resilient are regions like my riding of Prescott-Russell-Cumberland to global food disruptions compared to more urban or Western agricultural regions?
Thank you for the question. We really haven't looked at regions across the country, but we actually have compared, say, Canada with other G20 countries in terms of resiliency. In fact, that's why my colleague, Olivia Romanow, is actually in the room, because she did most of the work supported by our partner MNP. I don't know if Olivia would actually have something to say about that, but it's important. I think your point is quite critical in terms of comparing and looking at differences between regions and regions around the world. Olivia, do you want to add anything to the work that we've been doing on benchmarking?
Again, like Sylvain said, we haven't looked at urban versus rural areas in a lot of detail. Canada seems to be pretty moderate performance and resilience in the G20. Production levels are quite stable. However, there are some challenges, obviously, with you know what? I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
It's no problem at all. Thank you for your answers. So your work emphasizes distribution. What vulnerabilities exist in regional food distribution networks like in Eastern Ontario?
Well, so if the question is asked to me, I would say distances. The reason why I thought that the investment on food hubs was critical was exactly to that point. The Ontario Food Terminal is a good case study. We've actually studied the Ontario Food Terminal in terms of its capacity to bring food into this urban region, supported by rural areas. In rural areas, and frankly, this is the reality that we're facing in Atlantic Canada, is that it's very tough for farmers to do business and connect with cities without a functional architecture based on hubs. And we don't have that necessarily. We have some hubs in the Maritimes, but they're not as efficient as they should be. And when you do that, you increase wealth in regions supporting farmers even more.
Thank you so much. Last question for you both. Does your research suggest that communities like ours are overly dependent on external supply chains despite being surrounded by agricultural production?
Well, going back to your own writing, which I know a little about, I think supply management is very much a big part of that economy. And so obviously supply management has built an ecosystem that actually makes the agri-food sector, in your writing, more resilient, I would say, versus other, or less vulnerable to external factors as other writings, for example.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm now going to turn my questions to yourself, Mr. Harrison. So Eastern Ontario has a mix of smaller family farms and productive grain land. How do policies designed at a national level sometimes miss the realities of Eastern Ontario, of the Eastern Ontario region?
Well, not only Eastern Ontario, but Eastern Canada is unique. We work very collaboratively with our farmers across the country, but Eastern Canada has unique differences. We service similar markets. We source our inputs from similar regions. We grow similar crops. And of course, we all work in a very densely populated part of our country. So all of those challenges contribute to a farmer's viability. And so in Eastern Ontario specifically, policies in particular, you hear us talking about fertilizer. We not only service value-added processing sectors, but we are also looked upon to feed the world. We do a lot of good work in supplying nations that need our farmers through export facilities. So the policies that a good ag policy is important to our farmers in Eastern Canada and Eastern Ontario, as particular to your question.
Thank you so much. And are there unique soil drainage or climate conditions in Eastern Canada that should be reflected in federal agriculture programs that we don't know about yet?
Unique? I would say that it's important to recognize that Eastern Ontario certainly has an abundance of water. And of course, the infrastructure that has been put in over generations, whether it's highway, rail, pipeline, municipal infrastructure, all of those things have affected farm drainage and soil topography, all of those. And you speak of farm drainage, I would use the term improving farmland. We've been improving as a nation our farmland since we got here. And it's been allowed for us to not only achieve economies of scale, but efficiencies. And it's important to remember also be more environmentally conscious with efficient use of our inputs. So improving farmland in Eastern Ontario has been a practice that we've been doing for a while, and we need it to continue.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to the block for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Anderson, we met last week in my office, a meeting that I appreciated greatly. You underscore an interesting point about the inputs required for your sector's production. Right now, given the geopolitical situation, it's difficult to have access to your fertilizer, such that you say 45-50% of the rise in price of grains is due to the higher price of fertilizer. What do you think the solution is? I'd also like to put a second question to you. The recent agreements, do they give you any sort of hope that you will be able to access stably priced fertilizer?
It's important to remember that grain farmers in Eastern Canada, grain farmers across this country, are expected to be globally competitive. Our prices that we receive for our crops are derived in a global marketplace, and we need to be able to be competitive. So our inputs need to be able to be sourced in a free and open marketplace the same way. It's important to remember that the price that our commodities are sold for do not care what it costs a farmer to produce. And that is the essence of farmers that are required, non-supply managed farmers that are required to be globally competitive. As far as the fertilizer question, we need to be able to source fertilizer in a free and open marketplace. Supply at all cost is not a solution for our farmers. We have a competitive issue here in Eastern Canada. We don't have enough competitors that we do business with as farmers. We need a competitive environment. They need to be able to source it from all regions of the world. And we need to be able to supply good quality fertilizer. Remember, fertilizer that has come from the Belarus and Russian region has come from a similar climate. Fertilizer that we're sourcing from other regions around the world, much warmer temperate climates, when it's transitioned, that product comes into Canada, it's a significant difference. And so it leads to the degradation of the product, which also leads to poor application process. It's important. We don't need supply at all costs. We need affordable access to the supply. We need it in a timely manner so that farmers can have confidence in the system, and we need good quality products so that we can do what we do.
Je pense qu'une des éléments importants.
I think that one of the important elements to keep in mind for production across all sectors, forest, agriculture, and mines, would be to ensure that we meet producers' needs. Could we make some fertilizers here in Canada? Potassium, for example, you bring that in from Morocco or from elsewhere rather than from within Canada. Why couldn't we use Canadian-made fertilizer?
Claim that we're a net exporter of fertilizer as a nation, because I think the truth is we're pretty close neck and neck either way. But the reality is we are a global leader as far as potash production, potash mining, product exportation. Other nations look to Canada as a key producer of potash. But in Eastern Canada, we have very little nitrogen production. And it's a system that has been depended on through our seaway, that we rely on other nations to import nitrogen. So to look at projects where we could produce our own nitrogen, that would be great and would be welcomed by farmers. But the reality is nitrogen production around the world is sourced from regions where natural gas is virtually free, almost as if a byproduct. So for us to be competitive in our regulatory environment would be a significant challenge. And farmers, if we're expected to be a global competitive, we cannot pay a premium on that product. And if we are to go down that route, it will make BRM programs, BRM funding, mechanics to help farmers manage risk all the more important.
Dans ma région, et c'est la même chose dans plusieurs des régions que vous couvrez, les coûts de transport sont un...
In my region, it's the same thing. A lot of transportation problems as well. It can cost $3,500 to transport one truckload, whereas in another area it's $700. So how can we reduce transportation costs to help regional producers, those in faraway regions where it costs so much more? Do you think the government could help in transportation costs?
Have a solution to that, but what I would tell you is I have heard the claim potash can be moved out of the port of Vancouver on a Panamax vessel around the Panama Canal and service the European Union for less money than we can put it on a rail car and bring potash to Eastern Canada. I asked that question at a conference, the H2O conference in December, and that statement was reaffirmed, which is really sad when nations around the world look to Canada as a potash supplier and Eastern Canada is paying a premium for that product because of transportation costs. So I'm sorry, I do not have a solution to that, but that is definitely a problem we need to address to help our Eastern Canadian producers.
Dernière question. Vous avez mentionné un peu dans vos remarques préliminaires.
Last question. You mentioned this in your opening statement, how important it is to increase the flexibility of provinces so that they can adapt their risk management programs to their territory. So how could this help your grain producers, your cereal producers?
A program that has been, promoted by the government for farmers to utilize as a risk management tool. The reality is it works for some sectors and doesn't work for others. And if anyone wants to question how that program, the value of that program, one only needs to look at the dismal rate of participation. That being said, there is differences in provinces across this nation. Geographic needs that business risk management has to address. And in order for all provinces to get on board with this, we need to have a program that will address those differences.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Mr. Epp for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to stay on the theme of fertilizer and its importance. A quote: "While many of the most pressing and daunting black swan events of the last few years have subsided and helped fertilizer values to correct, there remain substantial issues that continue to threaten global fertilizer supplies. Today, it's not out of line to forecast a future where fertilizer production inventories are impacted severely enough that global food supplies are threatened." That's a quote coming from a StoneX report that the Grain Farmers of Ontario commissioned and is more than timely. It was done August of 2024, before the Strait of Hormuz. So here we are today. So my question to you, Mr. Harrison, is what has been announced since 2024 to exactly, as you were in your previous responses to my colleague from the bloc, to secure Canada's fertilizer supplies? Abundance, we have a potash, but we can't get it to Eastern Canada economically. From a nitrogen perspective, how many dollars have been put into nitrogen production into Eastern Canada? We have the natural gas. If you can respond to that, let me go to phosphorus for a second, and I'll give you the rest of the time. Norway has found abundant supplies of phosphorus, a northern country where we can source phosphorus. What has been done with our relationship with Norway to have that become a more reliable supplier than even perhaps Florida or the other areas that you have outlined? Mr. Harrison, please.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Mr. Rep. I know of no dollars that have been attributed to projects to develop or increase nitrogen production. I know there has been ideas lofted and thoughts of the good thing that we could go forward in that direction, but I know of no dollars that have been attributed to that. As far as phosphorus, yes, phosphorus is an important product. You know as well as I do. Starter fertilizers that we use for growing the soft red winter wheat that we grow here in Ontario so abundantly and such top quality that other nations are look upon us to supply. Phosphorus, though, really only comes from a few places in the world, and it has been on an upward trajectory for many years. And phosphorus in particular, we saw the perfect example of how tariffs are just a bad idea and penalize our farmers, because the United States put some protectionist policy tariffs in place to protect some of their own producers in the United States. And then in turn, we were paying a tariff on a tariff when we bring phosphorus in. So I can't speak enough about how tariffs, retaliatory tariffs, hurt our farmers, penalize our farmers, and ultimately jeopardize our family farms.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Mr. McDonald for 2.5 minutes.
Well, you've taken half my time. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll ask a question first to Mr. Harrison on fertilizer. And I'm not rebutting what's been said. I'm just telling you, I'm from Atlantic Canada. I think in Canada, we do have to develop a strategy and a plan going forward to be self-reliant or more self-reliant on fertilizer supply. The federal government is involved in Saskatchewan in urea production. There'll be some interesting things come out of that, those talks. There is the Canadian Phosphate Company, which is mining in British Columbia. Obviously for Ontario, Quebec, and Eastern Canada, that's not going to align for us. But the development of Churchill Port could help us with the potash issue. Obviously, all fertilizer companies bring their supplies in early fall, and they're stored, and it would give us stability and some prices. So I don't want to get into the sensitivity around the embargo on the Russian fertilizer. I think the federal government has been quite clear on we're not supporting anything Russian while this war is going on in Ukraine. So I'll just get your comments on maybe the availability of port development in Churchill that would bring potash east.
Thank you for the question. I'll just address the first question, I guess. I want to make it perfectly clear. We at the Grain Farmers of Ontario, and I think I can speak for Eastern Canadian farmers, once again, aren't looking to promote business with Russia. But what we are asking is for this government and all decision makers to support Canadian family farms. We're trying to all work together to address food affordability, food sovereignty, food security, and family farms are part of that answer. That being said, we welcome any ideas. We want to work constructively with government and all decision makers to solve this problem. We're not looking to politicize this issue. We want solutions for farmers and for agriculture and ultimately our citizens. So we would be welcome to sit down and talk about any ideas to move fertilizer from parts of this nation into Eastern Canada to solve this problem, or fertilizer from other parts of the world more efficiently so that our farmers can be productive and competitive.
Thanks very much, Mr. Harrison. I'm going to go to...
We're going to stop there. Sorry, the 2.5 minutes is gone. Mr. Lemaire, 1.5 minutes.
Sorry, I was quite sure, Mr. Chair, that I would not have a second time to speak. I'm so sorry. All right. Mr. Charlebois, could you tell us how important it is to process food and to be able to have in Canada at our farms what we need? We don't seem to have a supply chain supporting our farmers. How would having one make a difference to ensure that we remain more resilient, that we don't depend on international partners, and that we be better able to eat locally and at good prices? Very good question, Mr. Lemire. Quebec is a good example. Quebec takes 160% or 100% of its own food in its own territory and feeds its own people, which gives it much more food security, which can't be said for the rest of Canada. The more that we work on processing our own food, the more we control our own destiny. And it's easier to support our own farmers and to innovate and adapt our products ongoing to a dynamic market. So there would be economies of scale, it would seem, based on your evaluation, to producing more inputs, in particular fertilizer that Mr. Harrison has brought up. We could do so, and especially if we did so at scale, we would get economies of scale. Absolutely. There are two things to keep in mind. We need to allow our enterprises to grow. That's what we're missing in Canada, to work at scale. And also, when you see a startup, you have to think of the ecosystem around that enterprise, the ingredients that that enterprise needs, so to speak, to produce an enterprise at scale. Often we think of an enterprise all on its own and so on and so forth, but that's not how it works in Europe. I'm in Europe now, and they're working on ecosystems to support transformation.
That concludes our testimony for the first half. We'll suspend for 5 minutes. And thank you. September 18th, 2025. The committee is resuming its study on food security in the face of global stability. I'd like to welcome our witnesses joining us here today. From CropLife Canada, Emily Bergeron and Gregory Colts. From Food and Beverage Canada, Christina Farrell. And from Food Processing Council of Quebec, Sylvain Coultier and Dimitri Frey. Welcome, and we'll start with CropLife Canada for 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear before you today as part of your study on food security in the face of global instability. My name is Greg Coles, Vice President of Government Affairs at CropLife Canada, and I'm joined today by my colleague Émilie Bergeron, Vice President of Crop Protection. CropLife Canada represents the developers, manufacturers, and distributors of pesticides and plant breeding innovations. Our members invest billions of dollars annually in research and development to help farmers produce more food more sustainably. We welcome this study because food security is no longer simply an agricultural issue. It's an economic issue, a trade issue, a geopolitical issue, and increasingly a national security issue. As Prime Minister Carney stated last week, to protect our sovereignty and take control of our future, we must take control of our food system. Recent years have demonstrated how vulnerable global food systems can be. Armed conflict, supply chain disruptions, climate pressures, and geopolitical uncertainty have all affected food production and affordability around the world. These challenges have reinforced an important reality. Countries that can reliably produce food are better positioned to protect their citizens, support their allies, and contribute to global stability. Canada is uniquely positioned to be a world leader in food security. We have productive farmland, innovative farmers, world-class researchers, and a reputation as a trusted supplier of safe, high-quality food. The question before us is whether we are prepared to seize that opportunity. CropLife Canada welcomed the Government of Canada's release of the National Food Security Strategy last week and its recognition of food security as a critical national priority. The strategy rightly recognizes that seed innovation and crop protection tools are essential to agricultural productivity and safeguarding Canada's food supply. We are also encouraged by the government's recognition that a strong regulatory system must not only protect health and safety, but also enable innovation, investment, and productivity. Canadian farmers need timely access to new technologies that help them increase yields, combat pests and diseases, adapt to environmental pressures, and produce affordable food. Yet too often, access to innovation is delayed by regulatory backlogs and approval timelines that are simply not being met. The National Food Security Strategy directly acknowledges this challenge and establishes ambitious targets to reduce seed and crop protection approval backlogs and improve regulatory performance. These commitments are important, but Canada must now deliver on them.
Le système réglementaire canadien est reconnu à l'échelle. Canada's regulatory system is recognized as rigorous science-based. Maintaining the scientific foundation is essential, but excellence in science must be matched by excellence in service delivery. When approval timelines are missed and application backlogs grow, Canadian farmers are denied access to innovations already available to competitors in other countries. The strategy also recognizes the importance of updating the mandates of both the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the Pesticides Regulatory Directorate to include food security and food affordability considerations. Bill C-30, which is currently before Parliament, is an important step toward ensuring our regulatory framework reflects these broader public policy objectives while continuing to uphold the highest standards of health and environmental protection. We encourage Parliament to pass this legislation as quickly as possible. Innovation allows farmers to grow more food on existing farmland, reduce crop losses, conserve resources, and improve resilience in the face of environmental and economic pressures. The opportunity before Canada is significant as countries around the world seek reliable food suppliers and resilient agricultural partners. Canada can distinguish itself as a global leader in agricultural innovation and food production.
Regulatory framework and a continued commitment to science-based decision-making, Canada can attract investment, accelerate innovation, strengthen economic growth, and enhance both food security and national security. Science-based crop protection, plant breeding innovation, and regulatory efficiencies are not merely agricultural issues. They are essential components of Canada's ability to help create a more affordable, sustainable, and resilient food supply chain in Canada and internationally. The National Food Security Strategy provides an important roadmap. Now we must work together to implement its commitment and realize its ambition of making Canada an agriculture and food superpower. Thank you. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to Food and Beverage Canada for 5 minutes.
My name is Christina Farrell, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Food and Beverage Canada, the national association representing Canada's food and beverage manufacturers. Food security has become an increasingly important topic as Canadians face rising costs, global instability, supply chain disruptions, and shifting trade relationships. These challenges have prompted an important conversation about Canada's ability to feed itself and strengthen its economic resilience. At Food and Beverage Canada, we believe Canada has an enormous opportunity before it. The good news is that Canada does not have a food availability problem. Canada already produces far more agricultural products than our domestic market can absorb. The opportunity is to process more of those products here at home, creating jobs, attracting investment, increasing exports, and generating more value from Canadian agriculture. In other words, Canada's food security challenge is increasingly a competitiveness challenge. If we want a more resilient and self-sufficient food system, we must focus not only on agricultural production, but also on processing more food here at home. Every additional ton of Canadian agricultural product that is processed domestically creates jobs, investment, exports, tax revenue, and economic activity. It also strengthens our supply chains and reduces our vulnerability to external shocks. That is why Food and Beverage Canada has consistently advocated for a stronger focus on domestic processing capacity. We welcomed elements of the recently released National Food Security Strategy, particularly the recognition that domestic processing is an important part of Canada's food system. Investments in food infrastructure, distribution networks, and support for SMEs may provide benefits to part of the food system. However, we remain concerned that the strategy places considerably more emphasis on food production and distribution than on the competitiveness challenges facing Canada's food and beverage manufacturers. If Canada wants to produce more domestically, we must address the factors that influence where companies choose to invest. Our members consistently identify labor shortages, regulatory burden, transportation and energy costs, and lagging productivity as barriers to growth. Food affordability starts with the cost of producing food. When manufacturers face higher costs, those costs ultimately work their way through the supply chain. Improving affordability, therefore, requires improving competitiveness. For Food and Beverage Canada, that means focusing on 4 things. First, we must significantly expand domestic processing capacity through targeted investments that support modernization, automation, and productivity enhancements. We have consistently called for a 5-year, $2 billion domestic processing fund to help companies de-risk large-scale investments needed to produce at scale and compete against imports. Reducing food production costs at the source is the most effective lever for ensuring food affordability over the long term. Second, we must address labor shortages by ensuring that food and beverage manufacturing has access to a stable, permanent workforce. Food security depends on people. That means, among other things, creating pathways for workers already contributing to Canada's food system to become permanent residents. Third, governments must reduce unnecessary regulatory burden and ensure new regulations are evaluated through a food affordability and competitiveness lens. Efforts should also be made to identify and remove outdated, misaligned, and duplicative regulations that no longer add value to health, safety, or consumer confidence, yet continue to inflate costs and hinder productivity. Finally, Canada must create a more competitive investment environment. This requires speeding up permitting timelines to build or expand capacity, as well as expanding approval for innovative food ingredients that are already safely used abroad but await approval here. Other countries understand this. Around the world, governments are competing aggressively for food and beverage manufacturing investment. They recognize it not only as a food security issue, but as a major economic development opportunity, and Canada should be doing the same. The Prime Minister has spoken about processing more of what Canadian farmers grow, strengthening food sovereignty, and building a more resilient food system. And we support that vision, but achieving that vision will require more than growing food. It will require a long-term competitiveness agenda that encourages businesses to invest, innovate, and expand capacity in Canada. Canada has all of the ingredients needed to become a global agri-food leader. The opportunity before us is to process more of what we grow, create more value from Canadian agriculture, and strengthen our economic resilience. If we get this right, we can strengthen food security, improve affordability, create jobs, attract investment, increase exports, and build a more competitive Canadian economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to the Food Processing Council of Quebec for 5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to take part in this important study on food security in the face of global instability. My colleague Dimitri Fez and I represent the Quebec Food Processing Council, the CTAQ, which brings together food processing companies of all sizes and from all sectors. Our members transform agricultural raw material into food that is accessible, safe, and is available to consumers here and elsewhere. Food security is often associated with the ability to produce food. However, it depends just as much on our ability to process, distribute, and make food accessible in all circumstances. The events of recent years, the pandemic, supply chain disruptions, inflation, climate change, and geopolitical instability have shown that food resilience depends on the entire value chain. In this regard, food processing plays a strategic role. Our sector is Canada's largest manufacturing sector in terms of shipments and jobs, and provides the vast majority of the food consumed by Canadians. Yet, Canada still lags worryingly behind in terms of investment in its own agri-food sector, as highlighted in the motion that prompted your study. That is why we welcomed the launch on the 11th of June of Canada's very first National Food Security Strategy. The CTAC shares many of the announced objectives, notably the commitment to process more food right here in Canada, to support innovation, to modernize processing capacity, and to reduce certain regulatory barriers that hinder businesses' competitiveness. In particular, we believe that the creation of the $1 billion Agri-Food Project fund administered by Farm Credit Canada is a positive step. For several years now, our sector has highlighted the difficulty of securing funding for certain food processing projects, even though they're essential to creating added value in Canada. That said, we must now ensure that these measures translate into real investment on the ground and that they're accessible to food processing enterprises of all sizes. The implementation details will be crucial to ensuring the success of the strategy. Canada's food security cannot be strengthened by new programs alone, however. It will also require a business environment that fosters investment, innovation, and productivity. Food processing companies continue to face significant challenges: labor shortages, rising operating costs, regulatory pressure, international competition, and the need to invest heavily in automation and digitalization. This is why we believe that creating value within the Canadian food chain must remain a priority. Every time we process more of what our farmers produce here, we create jobs, strengthen our regions, increase our food self-sufficiency, and we keep more wealth in Canada. We also believe that consumers have an important role to play. The growing interest in locally produced and processed food represents an exceptional opportunity to strengthen our food supply chains. However, businesses must have the tools, infrastructure, and conditions necessary to meet this new demand. In light of these findings, we would like to put forward 3 recommendations to the committee. First, to facilitate the interprovincial movement of Canadian food products by continuing efforts to harmonize regulations and by supporting provincially inspected establishments in meeting federal standards in order to expand their access to markets across the country. Secondly, to accelerate investment in food processing capacity, in particular by ensuring that new federal programs meet the real needs of enterprises and encourage business investment, including private investment. Thirdly, continue efforts towards automation, robotization, and digital transformation of food enterprises to improve their competitivity and productivity. In conclusion, Canada has all the assets needed to become a global leader in food security. Recent announcements demonstrate a renewed willingness to take action. The challenge now before us is to turn this willingness into concrete results that will help build a more resilient, competitive, and self-sufficient food system. Thank you for your attention. We'll be happy to answer your questions.
We're going to start with the Conservatives for 5 minutes. We're going to do 3 5-minute rounds, and then I'll just assess the final minutes, maybe do the second round like 3, 3, 2, something like that. But we do need a few moments at the end to go through the drafting instructions. So, Mr. Gord, 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ma question va être pour Madame.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question goes to Ms. Cloutier. You mentioned of the new strategy, that there will be a new fund, $1 billion to be invested in processing. However, Canada agricultural funding already had money put aside for processing. Part of its budget goes to processing. So is this truly new money, or is this repeating what that group was already doing? Because sometimes we see in announcements, things that are already underway. I'm told it's new funding. I put the same question that you just put, Mr. Gould, and I was told that that billion was new funding. As for the other programming within the new National Food Security Strategy for food and vegetables, for example, fruits and vegetables, and for groceries as well, it remains to be seen what the strategy will provide in real programming for processing. So this new funding, is this funding that Agricultural Financing Canada will be loaning? Is it really new money, or will they just have a higher loan capacity? Otherwise, I'm not sure how helpful that is, really. We'll have to wait for the conclusions or the specifics of the program, which should be announced, I imagine, in the coming weeks. Based from my own experience, and I'm not young, and I've worked in this sector since I was 10 years old. It's very rare that funding is non-reimbursable. I'm sure it will likely be loans at the rates now provided to farmers. So I don't see what the difference is, either before or after this announcement. What do you think? Yes, indeed. We are asking the government for more loans. Well, sorry, not loans, but out-and-out funding. And we really need to see what it will look like once it's all laid out. I'm not working behind closed doors, so I don't really know whether we'll get grants or not. Now, processors sometimes need real serious loans, several million, but these enterprises don't necessarily have the guarantees or securities needed to obtain these loans. So is there some opening to their being able to get loans more easily from Canada? We'll have to wait and see, Mr. Gould. As I said, for the final results, the final announcements about the actual programming. I really can't answer that question for you today. What we do know is that it's to be new money. That's all we know. We, of course, would prefer more grants, whether through agricultural financing, funding Canada, or other specific Canadian grants, but we would like more grants, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises. I think that Canadians are tired of waiting, always waiting for the government to present details of initiatives, and sometimes it's just a repeat of something that's already available. It looks like they're just, playing hat tricks, hoping that something will change. Have you discussed this with your associations? They're working at processing the real stuff, but the availability of funds in the years to come. There will be fewer and fewer actually processors in my region. I have a couple of enterprises actually selling, no one taking over their farms. That's the tendency. The young people don't want to take over the farming. What are you doing about this? At this point in Quebec, as you know, 70% of agricultural production is processed and resold, of course. And nearly 100% of our sea produce produced in Quebec is processed in Quebec. So we hope for a more productive processing sector in order to be able to work more closely with Quebec farmers, and including all types of agricultural production, organic included. And my colleague Dimitri might add something. Well, let me just get in here. We can't live on hope. Our responsibilities as legislators, as members of parliament, is to ensure that Canadians have food at affordable prices. Just hoping that affordability will improve or that productivity will improve. I mean, we're already at our maximum. There's never been so much high-end machinery. We've got the technology, you know. We can't just hope there will be people to use the machines.
5 minutes, MP Chatel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et merci à
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses. Thank you for your very positive comments about the new national food security strategy. I'm not surprised to hear you saying positive things about it because, you know, it comes from you in a way. We have been discussing this topic and consulting you for over a year, and your comments, your contributions have been greatly appreciated throughout the entirety of the process. Thanks again. I would like to begin with you, Ms. Farrell. For the processing sector, we've had a number of discussions over a number of months, and you have always put forward the request for more funding for processing foods. And Ms. Cloutier, yourself as well, you have really been a big champion of the sector. I'd like to hear you on the following. A number of measures have been put forward. There's the super deduction for productivity, which is an investment delivered via tax credits, so the fiscal system. I would like to hear about applying that in practice. Are your processors starting to use that option? And we have also added, yes, indeed, $1 billion in new funding, indeed, provided to agriculture financing, the fund, and many witnesses have come to tell us that that's a really useful vehicle for supporting real groups on the ground. Farm Credit Canada, it will now have this extra billion on top of the $2 billion already there, and then another $5 billion from a coalition of investors, all that at Farm Credit Canada. So with all these investments, will we meet our goals announced in the policy to raise by 2.2% a year the processing of foods here in Canada? Let me begin by Ms. Farrell.
So the productivity super deduction was very welcome by our members. We actually provided a session to our member companies to explore this further and to provide them with advice as to how they could take advantage of the measure. There were some new funds announced, including for the regional development agencies, which I think is fantastic, that will provide support, especially to some of our SMEs. For some of these new programs, though, I think the really important thing will be the details. So in terms of FCC, their previous announced venture with an additional 20 other firms, again, was welcome, but that'll only serve the needs of a very specific type of company in this country. The new fund, it sounds like a lot, $1 billion, but we don't know the details of that. As Sylvie mentioned, we are looking in some cases for non-refundable contributions that help to reduce the total project costs that are sometimes needed to meet the return on investment thresholds required by private investors or commercial lenders. So really, we are looking for a good mix of repayable and non-repayable contributions. So I think there's still a bit of work to do, but it has been promising news over the last week.
Merci, Madame Cloutier.
Thank you, Ms. Cloutier. I will allow my colleague Dimitri answer this question. Thank you, Ms. Chatel. So economic uncertainty has considerably affected investment in businesses. In 2025 in Quebec, investments fell by 16%. So, to take advantage of the tax deduction, enterprises need, nevertheless, an economic context that encourages investment. And as you know, as of a number of months now, the economic uncertainty is leading to their putting projects off. That is why Ms. Farad has said that it requires both grants and loans. Ms. Cloutier is saying the same thing. That's the key message. If we want to get investments up and at a time when enterprises feel risk, if we want them to feel that the risk is reduced, overall, we need to create a kind of climate, an ecosystem that supports investment. Considering the results, the OCDE tells us that Canada has lost its position with regard to productivity, and that's an essential fact. We need to improve the confidence level of enterprises to get them to invest and increase productivity. I would like to underscore that with Ms. Cloutier, we discussed Buy Canada and the importance of giving consumers the tools to choose to buy Canadian products. And that as well is in the new strategy. Thanks again, Ms. Cloutier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. C'est toujours intéressant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's always interesting to see colleagues proudly defend the work they've carried out. Bravo, Sophie. Nice to mention. But we're also here to criticize, of course, what's underway. That said, I am going to look at this with clear eyes. What's good, what's bad. I had a prejudice before I became a politician. I tended to look at the cost of foodstuff and say producers are making less and less money, yet it's costing us twice as much to buy these products. So who's actually making money? I had the impression that processors, took a lot. But we see that it's really the concentration of middle groups that profits are made. They're making excessive profits. It's not really the processors. So how could we ensure that there be more competition in the grocery store sector to make sure that processors get the money they deserve? Is the question for me? Yes, indeed, yes. Yes, Ms. Cloutier. So having less concentration, less monopolization among grocery stores, that would certainly help ensure that we would have more places to sell our products in Canada. The Code of Conduct was set in 10 months ago. Has that led to any improvement? Well, there are about 100 members who at the office of the Code of Conduct. There's a new board of directors getting to work there as well, so we'll surely see results in the months to come. The government announced last week its investments, as we know full well. I think that we need to create more processing in Quebec and across Canada to create more value. You've mentioned that as a positive route to take, but what are our expectations? We know that details really count in any program. What are your expectations of the government's undertaking? Well, when it comes to access to funding, to investment, to tools, that has to respond to real needs, today's needs, to allow our processors to do more, to become more productive, and also to have the labor that's able to support their work and also to work in the supply chain. You said earlier that you had some doubts about who's making money in the value chain. I can tell you when it comes to processors, we have a very small margin between 3 and 5%. So renewing our processing styles is essential. We need to innovate. We need to reinvest to remain competitive. And the only way to do that is through productivity tools. in a region like mine, the creation of these new agricultural hubs seems really necessary to allow local producers and processors to have access to demand to clients otherwise than via the big grocery store model. So how can we support that sort of approach, like in Témiscamingue? Do you think it can be really helpful? Will hubs give people access to reliable outlets? Yes, you mentioned public support, very helpful in the provinces and across Canada. We need to encourage and find ways to encourage the purchase of more Quebec goods or Canadian goods. Also in the restaurants, the chain also involves hotels and restaurants. We need to encourage buy local and build networks that are local and regional. I was heading in that direction. The institutional aspect, Quebec has, over the last few years, worked hard to ensure that products offered in public institutions are sourced locally. The national strategy to purchase within Quebec, has this initiative had an effect on your members, and do you think it could be used at the federal level? It certainly could.
Sorry. So we're going to do a final round. We do need some time for drafting instructions. We've reserved 15 minutes, so maybe we'll do 2.5, 2.5, and 1.5, and then we'll go into the drafting instructions, if that's fine with folks. Mr. Rep, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No one is challenging this government's ability for grand announcements. No doubt they're always accompanied with top-shelf graphics as well. But if I were American, I'd be from the state of Missouri. And what I'm hearing from witnesses today is that's the show me state. So what I'm hearing is show me. I'll start with Ms. Farrell. Quote, it does not fully reflect the level of ambition needed to significantly expand domestic processing capacity and create more value from agriculture. No doubt we're all welcoming a focus on the missing middle, value-added processing. Can you explain your comment a bit there, Ms. Farrell?
The strategy includes measures that may help, but it does not yet provide the scale, coordination, or ambition required to significantly expand domestic processing capacity, which means targeted measures support modernization, automation, investment, but also labor, regulatory efficiency, and costs.
Thank you. The Canadian Meat Council also quoted, the strategy does not include a plan for addressing ongoing labor shortages in the agri-food sector. You also mentioned that in your testimony, labor shortages. Are you satisfied with the announcements?
No, there was not a reference to labor as it relates to domestic processing capacity.
Thank you. I'll switch to crop life. The last time the PMRA got a dollop of money, we ended up with the Transformation Initiative and a Citizen Science Council, which, while spending a lot of money, gummed up the works and slowed things down. Can you comment on confidence levels that actually the focus, which is welcome, will actually produce results?
Well, I think we were quite pleasantly surprised to see fairly ambitious commitments in the food security strategy, one being eliminating the CFIA and pesticide or the PRD approval backlogs by the end of 2026, the other being reducing the average time for future approvals at both CFIA and PRD by at least 1/3. To your point, similar announcements have been made in the past, and it's about holding them to account. I think the government has shown a certain openness and perhaps ambition. What we need to see, frankly, is a culture shift at the departmental level. And the hope is that by working collaboratively, we can advance this. We see this as an opportunity, frankly. Again, Canada can be the world's food security partner. And being more productive here means that food security and stability can also be achieved abroad. So it's ambitious. We were pleased with the commitments that were made, but we've heard similar commitments in the past, and now's the time to put those commitments into action.
I'm from Missouri. Show me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next, we'll go to, is it MP Dandran? Okay, 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à tous les témoins.
Thank you, and thank you to all our witnesses here with us today. I will put my question to Food and Beverages Canada and to the Food Processing Council of Quebec. With regard to investments, that are being announced for agriculture and agri-food processing. There are now undertakings, but we have to deliver on them. There are two aspects of the undertakings. One for the large food hubs, something like what's going on in Toronto, and the other for smaller local projects. If we invest money locally in support of processing, refrigeration, and all that, what are the essential elements in programming? What do we need in this programming to ensure that these new centers and hubs really do help our food farmers and ensure safety?
We haven't yet looked at it from the perspective as to how it'll impact food and beverage manufacturing in this country. In terms of program delivery, though, I think for our member companies, these programs are often too limited in scope, they're underfunded, or they have strict eligibility criteria that leaves out, in particular, medium to large companies. So for us, it's, again, the details of these programs, and our companies have expressed the need for these funds to go out quickly. It takes a lot of time and investment from a company in the country, small or large, to respond to some of these programs. So the speed at which they can support companies is very important.
If I may, the programs need to speak directly to small and medium-sized enterprises, given that 80% of those that feed Canada are in that category, meaning enterprises of less than 100 employees, and how long it takes to analyze it all is very important, because when an enterprise wants to get going on something, it sometimes has only a couple of months, not a couple of years. So you need to make it much faster for them to access whatever you're supplying. And the programs have to really focus on the small and medium-sized enterprises that don't always necessarily have the labor or the knowledge or the time to get the knowledge to figure out what to do. So you need to make it all as efficient as possible so that the enterprises can actually start up and implement the new technologies thanks to the support you're providing.
Mr. Lemire for 1.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Bergeron and Mr. Coles, last week at the C30, with regard to C30, the Canadian government allowed for the reintroduction of pesticides that had been banned in the past. They were reapproved. What role did CropLife play in that?
On that point, I want to be very clear. CropLife has not been advocating for or ask about these emergency powers. As we understand it, those emergency powers, which will be used in extremely rare cases, are to the benefits of provinces and growers.
Dans le contexte actuel aussi, une des demandes...
In the current context, another request that you have is to speed up approval of new technologies, of innovations, because often it takes from 6 to 8 years to obtain an approval at CFIA. So will things go faster in the years to come, or do you think it's still going to take far too long to get innovations available in agriculture in Canada? I would say that the strategy that we now have, that we're looking at now, does really provide political will to move forward to ensure approvals that should, at the very least, be what the PTIRA is providing, or the PMRA, rather, Pesticide Regulatory Directorate, and CFIA, to ensure that producers have access to new technology as quickly as possible to ensure that they remain productive and competitive.
Okay. That concludes this portion of the meeting. We will now suspend for about 5 minutes to switch to in-camera. Thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us here today.
Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you.